Right, let's have a bit of a chat about the cruise industry if we could. It's progressed quite a bit this year, I feel, and I think the obvious place to start is the headline statistic that we've broken the record by some margin for the number of visitors coming to Manx Shores this year. It was sort of working for 8,500 the end of last season. We smashed that in the middle of July. Predicted that could reach 11,000 by the end of this season. Does that represent a concerted effort maybe to try and increase those numbers, first of all?
Yeah, I think we've been very fortunate this year about the number of people who want to call in. It is what we would consider to be a spike, so I would expect a fall next year. But it's welcome for the Isle of Man in respect of our cruise industry. I mean, the cruise team themselves do an amazing job with an army of volunteers. And as you say, we have actually pushed, I would say maybe possibly even pushed our luck, because we are penciled in for 47 cruise ships to visitors during 2019. That was forecast to be around 12,500 visitors. That may fall slightly when we take into consideration weather and everything else. That's on top of 7,200 crew as well that come on shore and visit our attractions. So yeah, I think it's been an amazing year so far, and I think we've still got a lot of visits to happen. But this couldn't happen without the support of an army of volunteers and the cruise team themselves that work very, very long hours. So I wouldn't want to push it too far at this stage, but from what we've actually achieved over the last 4 or 5 years, everybody involved in this sector can be very proud of their efforts.
What sorts of things, what work has been done to try and boost those numbers? Where's it come from?
Well, it's not about boosting those numbers. It's about making people aware that we're here, and that they can consider calling into us and actually selling what the Isle of Man has. I mean, we have some great attractions, and I've never heard a negative comment when people come here and look at all the different attractions. We talk about our electric railways, our steam railways, Laxey Wheel, House of Manannan, even just going to places like Castletown and Peel and just wandering around. I mean, we've got a beautiful island here. I think we've got the balance right, that we're not overpopulating our cruise visitors onto our island, which enables our other visitors to enjoy the attractions as well. And it is about getting that balance right of actually telling people that we're here, putting on the best experience we can for those shore excursions, and just trying to sell the Isle of Man, encourage people to come back for a longer holiday at a later point.
You say telling people we're here, so has there been marketing specifically to cruise passengers?
Well, not to passengers, but what we do is we attend various events throughout the year. And as I say, Shona and Bash and others within the cruise team go to those sort of conferences and venues to sell the Isle of Man cruise industry. And we work very hard with cruise lines to actually say what we have to offer here. There's industries growing up on the back of this industry, which is absolutely fantastic news. You can see it where a lot of people are now obtaining blue badge guides to take people around the island to show off the Isle of Man. I've never seen a negative comment by any of the staff or volunteers that work with us on our cruise. Everybody's got a smile on the face. It doesn't matter if it's 6 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night. They are so welcoming. They help people, and I've gone down myself. You have as well, Dollin. You've witnessed it. It's a fantastic experience, and I personally, as the political member, love going onto these ships, saying hello to the crew, having a look around at the facilities, trying to speak to some of our visitors, finding out why they come to the Isle of Man, what are they looking to achieve. Some of them just come because for a particular reason. They want to do a horse tram, they want to do an electric railway, or they just want to know where their ancestors came from. That's quite a common one. They want to know where, a family member once lived here. They've now lived somewhere else, but they've just come back to have that connection. So we're very, very proud here, and I still think we've got a lot that we can nurture from this industry, but we're doing it the right way, slowly, but also not losing the quality.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is the spend per head for cruise passengers, because that's one of the things that a lot of skeptics, if you like, if I can use that word, of the cruise industry sort of point to, and they say, well, these are all inclusive packages, people are getting fed on board, watered on board. What benefit is it to the Manx economy? Cruise Isle of Man's figures this year of the spend that they're aware of, so that doesn't include things like tips, for example, Of the spend they're aware of, it's something like £58 or £59 a head. What do you make of that figure?
I'm not sure it is actually a reflection on the industry and the service that we provide. I think we have to take that with a pinch of salt at the moment until we can get some accurate data. What we do know is that this is from actual ticket sales, that if we take 2017, then we know shore excursions was over £193,000. Harbour duties was over £44,000, and the private sector, we believe, benefit from around £144,000. Now, that is for around 23 cruise ships in 2017. We now have up to 47 this year, so I expect those figures to be significantly more this year. But more importantly, this isn't just about local spend. I think people do genuinely spend. Okay, they may not actually go into a coffee house, but they do actually spend money in our attractions. So if we take like the House of Manannan, even the Manx Museum, which is free to enter, people will go in there but then buy something on the way out. I genuinely think that the local spend is a lot higher than those figures actually portray.
There's a perception, though, that people are going to get off and buy a cup of tea and a souvenir, basically. Do you think it's more than that, perhaps?
It might be in some cases, but we also know, if you take, for example, the crew, we know based on speaking to retailers in Strand Street that their activity within their stores is a lot busier during cruise days. So it may not be the case that the visitor goes into Marks and Spencer's or into Boots or any other shops in Strand Street, but they will tell you that the crew do. The crew come off that cruise ship and they go and grab their sort of items and put them back on the ship, and they may be not accounted for. If you take the cruise ship visitor themselves, as I say, they go off to various destinations. Some of the destinations are free, and that's fine. But they will also spend money. Yes, it might be just a cup of tea. Yes, it might just be a souvenir. But this is about actually having people into our attractions. This is about advertising and showcasing everything that's really good about the Isle of Man, and hoping that people will come back for a longer stay, not attached to a cruise ship. They'll come independently.
It's interesting as well where people come from. Just looking at some of the figures given to me from Shona and Bash, something like 3/5 come from America. Is that surprising?
Well, I think again at the moment that's people looking at their sort of family trees and saying, they've noticed a connection. That's quite strong in when we speak to our visitors. But I think that will change when the demographics of the cruise ships coming in. But what we do need to be very careful on is making sure that we keep quality, that we don't get quantity, and that is something that I'm reading a lot of stories with a lot of places. If you take like Venice, I've just read a fascinating article in Venice where the local Venetians are absolutely against these big cruise ships coming in, because it's such a big inward migration of visitors in any one time, and it's just creating major problems. So what we can do at the moment is we have a fantastic system. We have one cruise ship in, or even possibly two. We can cater for that. So we've got to be very mindful in the future that if we do get a deepwater berth, that we actually control it successfully, that we don't try and get greedy. We bring in the right level of cruise ships, the cruise ships that we know that we want on the Isle of Man, have a ceiling and say that's the maximum level of cruise passengers we need any given day, but then to make sure that our local attractions can accommodate that, but also not at the detriment of other people visiting the island at the same time.
We'll come to the deepwater berth idea in a minute, which is obviously where this is leading, but let's talk about Venice as the example, and some other kind of international examples, if you like. I'm sure you're aware of some. What are the concerns of locals there?
Well, if you take Barcelona is another one, Venice is another. It's where they've already got high tourist figures. So if you take, we'll use Venice as an example. Venice has millions of people visiting every year. What happens is the cruise ships come in, and first they cause disruption with regards to the amount of displacement of water which goes down the canal and everything else. But then you have 4,500 people, or even more than that in some cases, suddenly disembarking the cruise ship at one go, which then absolutely creates difficulties for businesses and locals to get around and do their own activities. So it is about the balance. Now, it is up to the authorities in Venice to deal with that and to address it. I think the Isle of Man needs to set a stall out very early on to say this is what we will accept. Because we've got to remember that day-to-day life has to continue on the Isle of Man, but there is definitely growth to accept cruise passengers into the Isle of Man, and I'm almost certain industries will grow around this once we've got a proper foothold and a deep water berth in the Isle of Man.
We saw some plans recently, fairly skeletal plans, but I'm sure you're aware of them, for a potential deep water berth in Douglas. It's a topic which comes up seemingly cyclically. What would your view be? Do you think that there is scope there?
Well, I think you must be referring to the Elliot Brown sort of plans. I think one of my colleagues said that was a bit left of field. I've not seen them other than what I saw in the local news, so I wasn't aware of them, and I'm not aware of the proposal, so I've actually not seen any detail. I think what we've got to do is really make sure that if we are having a deep water berth in the Isle of Man, that it pays for itself. It's over a long period of time. More importantly, that we get the positioning of that deep water berth in the right place, and we've got to listen to all sides on this. It can't just be led by the Council of Ministers or within a government department. All views have to be taken in consideration, and we have to position that deep water berth in the right place, have the right length on that berth in order to maximise the income, but as you say, not at the detriment of quality and the experience for our visitors.
What advantages would it bring, having a deep water berth?
Well, as you say, I think having gone out on that tender, unfortunately, the Isle of Man harbour is one of the worst that I've ever experienced. I'm surprised. I mean, I don't suffer from seasickness, but I've been seasick twice on our harbour. So I understand the difficulties of getting tenders off cruise ships and onto the Isle of Man. So if we did actually have a deep water berth and ships can connect to that, then it would actually save money for the cruise companies as well. So that would be very advantageous to them. I think for visitors and actually coming off those ships, they can get off a lot quicker and go back on and forth and whatever else. It would just make the whole infrastructure and the experience a lot better, because the tendering on the Isle of Man is one of the most difficult. And I am a cruise passenger myself, having done several cruises, so I've known that how difficult our tendering experience is.
I think at the minute something like, I've lost the figure now, I think it's 61% of cruise passengers coming to Manx waters get off, if you like, and go on excursions around the island. Is it hoped that that figure would sort of dramatically increase if all of the ships could come alongside? Is that what you were sort of implying?
Well, I think the figure would... I think, one, you could probably get all of the passengers off if need be. 61% seems a little low, but I don't think people stay on board just because there's a tender. Some people will, but it won't be a large percentage of people. I think people would stay on board because maybe they've done something the day before, or not really interested in this particular stop. We've all done it, just decide to have a day next to the pool, read a book and whatever. But I feel, yes, it would encourage more people to come on board, or to come on shore. But overall, this is about actually just providing the service. It's a big investment, but that investment has to pay for itself over a long period of time. But there are a lot of concerns about the cruise industry, but I genuinely think the Isle of Man does have an opportunity there, but it has to be the right opportunity.
Would it pay for itself?
Yes, I think it would. I think in respect of harbour duties, and if we then widen that out in respect of excursions, I think, yes, it definitely would, because we could potentially have 100 cruise ships in over a year, or even more than that. But we've got to, as I say, it's all about the quality. We've got to make sure that we're not just putting in 3 cruise ships a day and suddenly finding that then we've lost what we could market very, very successfully. It's all about that balance. But yes, it could pay for itself over a long period of time.
Mr. Bashforth said that we'd sort of hit our limit in terms of the size of boat that you could get right into Douglas Bay. I can't remember the exact figure. I think it's about 129 metres long was the longest they had, somewhere in that region. And his argument is that you have something like 200 cruise ships around the Irish Sea this season. Only maybe a quarter of those are able to come up alongside. So there's a market there already, I think, is the argument to be tapped into. Do you think?
Absolutely, there is an untapped market, and that was just saying. I think very quickly the Isle of Man, if it did have a deep water berth, it could be seen, because cruise ships don't want to go very long distance. So, suddenly going from Belfast or Dublin and suddenly pop into the Isle of Man, then go into Scotland, it makes sense. So there is an opportunity there to actually look at this and explore it. But it does need a lot of investigation. It needs a lot of thought to make sure we get the right deep water berth that actually, for a long period of time, actually is successful.
How about the environmental impact? That's another argument that's often raised by people who are less keen on the idea. What sorts of work's been undertaken on that front? How much are you aware about the environmental impact at the minute?
I think that's only just coming to the forefront now. It's something that, as this process goes forward, it's something that's going to have to be picked up. What is the environmental impact on the Isle of Man by having these number of people coming onto our island, doing these excursions? So we'll be using local buses, we'll be using coaches. All of that impact needs to be considered. I don't have any data with me, but there is a counter argument. If, say, for example, we bring in a cruise ship that has 2,000 passengers on it, that's 2,000 people that are not flying off on a holiday if they're just doing one around the UK. So it just needs to be properly assessed. It does need to be factored in, absolutely, because when we sat and looked at this, say, 3 or 4 years ago, that's completely changed to where we are now. Everybody is very conscious on the environmental impact of planes, trains and automobiles and everything else. But that will have to be factored in. I'm not sure exactly what the outcome will be, and it's probably maybe one of the very pivotal sort of factors in the final decision. But I think, as from an Isle of Man point of view, we also have to look at the economics. We've got to look at the economic value this potentially could bring to the Isle of Man. But we also got to be mindful of that 2050, zero carbon emissions sort of date that we've set ourselves. So that's very, very high on that agenda to look at. And it's not going to be an easy decision, I'm sure of that.
I don't have specific data to hand either, but I think as a generalisation, we can assume that cruise ships in themselves will have a fairly significant carbon footprint. I presume they vary from ship to ship, obviously, but generally speaking, I doubt they're going to be a particularly green mode of transport.
I would probably. I'm not sure. I saw a documentary the other day on cruise ships. Cruise ships are how they're being built today is significantly different of how they were built 15, 20 years ago. So the carbon footprint of a cruise ship is definitely reducing. Is it reduced enough? That's the big question. How they deal with their waste when they're off, around, in the sea, has to be addressed as well, to make sure that there's absolutely no waste going into any of our waters, and making sure that we actually support these cruise ships, in anything they need in respect of facilities and services themselves.
If there is any evidence that comes to light that they are environmentally damaging, do you think that's enough of a reason to put a stop on the idea of a deep water berth?
Well, sometimes, I don't know. I think the economic value will be very important. You then have to balance that off with the environmental issues. I'm expecting a very interesting debate when this finally comes, because even in this administration, the landscape has changed so much in the last 3 years. I think 3 years ago, I don't think there was very much questioned about the environmental issues of cruise ships. Suddenly, even today, every cruise ship that comes in, people are questioning, these people are coming off. They are jumping on coaches. They are jumping on our sort of tourism offerings. So there is a carbon footprint left behind. So the Isle of Man government as a whole is going to have to review that information, and do they do similar to what we've done with the TT, and that's offset the carbon emissions in order to gain the economic value for having that sector within our portfolio of offerings.
Is it time to have that debate, do you think?
I think it's coming. I think once we've got a firm understanding on the deep water berth, and we know that if the Isle of Man is going to go down that path, and I think at the moment the answer is yes, the Isle of Man is exploring a deep water berth. If that's the case, then that's the time that we need to question, how do we offset any carbon emission by cruise ships visiting the Isle of Man? Do we do what the TT does, and that's just get a third party organisation that goes off and we pay them a fee, and they then plant trees or whatever else around the world to offset any carbon that's actually caused because of the putting on the TT.
With your Department for Enterprise hat on, we've seen in the business confidence survey recently that the finance sector is the sort of least confident, in inverted commas, of all of the sectors at the minute, which has very much been a pillar of the Manx economy for, well, a generation at least, shall we say. Is there a feeling maybe that tourism as a sector could be making a resurgence? I'm speaking more generally now.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that was one of the things I picked up when I was very first elected. I think the finance industry, banking sector, insurance sectors are doing okay. E-gaming sector are doing okay at the moment. But if we're looking into the future, then I think we do need to potentially look at where we're going to generate our economic benefits in the future. Cruise industry could be one. I think there is a resurgence coming. I think, as I say, we've already seen just on the small number of cruise ships that come into the Isle of Man that businesses are being created around this. Tourist offerings are there. People take them out in mini coaches or minivans or whatever, and actually giving it personal tours to our visitors. So there are industries being created, and I think the more cruise ships that come into the Isle of Man, I think more industries and more sectors will start to grow and the offering will increase. So yeah, I definitely think there is resurgence there. But again, we've got difficult hurdles to get over first in respect to, as you've just mentioned, about the environmental, the impact of it, making sure that the overall spend of our visitors is contributing to our economy. So there's big questions to ask, but I still at the moment remain in favour of the scheme of having a look at the deepwater berth and accepting cruise ships as part of the overall tourist packaging that we're offering at the moment.
Just finally, I know that you've taken half a step back from chairing the Environment and Infrastructure Policy Review Committee, especially to do with its investigations into Douglas Promenade. With the state that the prom is currently in, and I appreciate that's a temporary measure, it's always billed as being the shop window of the Isle of Man, and especially for cruise passengers coming in to Douglas. Are we going to see a change again in perception and in feedback, perhaps when the prom's finished, as being the first impression,
I think once the promenade is finished, the Isle of Man needs to seriously look at a major marketing campaign with regard to visiting the Isle of Man. The promenade works at the moment. It is a major distraction, and it's not the right shop window that we're seeing. But it wasn't previously either. I was very embarrassed, to drive up and down the promenade thinking this is what visitors see. It needed to be redeveloped, and we're doing that. However, at the end of it, we've got to hope that there's businesses on the promenade. We've got to really seriously market the Isle of Man again about saying that we have changed our shop window. It is a great place to come and visit. It's something that we need to seriously look at, because the Isle of Man will change, and it may fit in very nicely with everything else that's going on with the cruise industry and us trying to promote tourism on the Isle of Man generally. We want our hotels full. We want the season to be more extended than it is currently. So there's a lot of people working behind the scenes to try and achieve that. We almost just wish the promenade was finished in order to get on with the job that we need to do, and that is to market the Isle of Man as a fantastic location to come and visit and to stay. But we need to do so much more over the next 2-3 years.
Because it feels as though cruise passengers get off the boat and then they get onto a bus or whatever it might be, and they're sort of whisked away to Peel or to Castletown or to other parts of the island. I don't know, that might not be true, but there's perhaps a perception that's the case, as though we're slightly ashamed of the first impression on the prom, do you think?
Well, I think, as I say, as a cruise passenger myself, I quite enjoy getting off a cruise ship, jumping in a coach, but then enjoying the view from the coach of where I'm visiting, looking around the surrounding area. I personally, if I was coming off a cruise ship at the moment going along the promenade, I'd be quite embarrassed about how the promenade looks. But I know we have to get over this period of time. We need the promenade to be finished. But I'm sure after that, then people will enjoy that experience of jumping on a coach, going to Laxey Wheel, but at the same time seeing the horse tram going up and down the promenade, or seeing the electric railway, going to Ramsey or Snaefell and whatever, and then on the way back maybe getting one of those attractions going back to the cruise ship. So there is a lot of opportunities here, there really is. But we now have to get over this pain of the promenade being redeveloped. We need other areas to buy into it as well. But I feel at the end of it, I think we really could have something that could be a resurgence. But it needs a lot of input and a lot of support from a lot of people, including the Manx public, because they're going to have to accommodate this, because there will be times over any particular financial year that there will be a burst of visitors coming into a particular attractions. But I still feel if we get it right, then it shouldn't be at the detriment of other people, locals or visitors, visiting those attractions.